hello, and welcome to another week's episode of Not D&D. As always, I'm your host, Jessica, and this week, a little antagonistically, I am joined by James. James, thanks so much for joining us.
Don't worry, I'll pretend to be nice. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to people.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on to talk and, share your game with us. So the game we're going to be talking about this week is called Antagonist. Not me just being unnecessarily hostile to James there. It's me trying to be funny. If you have any questions about the game and you're watching us live, please feel free to pop it in the chat and we'll do our best to answer live on the show. And we'll talk through this awesome world that you can see the map of there as we go through. And if you're listening to the podcast, we'll have any links to anything we're talking about in the show notes as well. So James, before we dive into the game, I always talk about you and your background with games. So what big question is always, what's your first role-playing game you remember playing?
So the first role-playing game I played wasn't the first role-playing game I saw. I saw some kids at my middle school playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I thought that was the greatest thing in the world, but I didn't know what it was. I wasn't playing it. I didn't even know the name of the game. So I went home and made my own role-playing game and played it with my brother. It was kind of based off of Final Fantasy, the old Nintendo game.
Okay, yeah.
So that was technically the first role-playing game I played. And eventually I got in good with the kids that were playing D&D because they were the cool kids at my middle school. And
the cool kids were the D&D players? That's not a classic story, but there you go.
Yeah. So and I eventually bought some old D&D books at a used bookstore because my funds were limited, so I got whatever I could and started playing that. So it would have been it was a used bookstore, so it was an old edition. It was Advanced Dungeons Dragons, the first one.
So proper classic then. Amazing.
Yep.
So it sounds like you've been, so the first game you played was when you wrote and designed yourself. So it seems quite natural that you now write and design games. So obviously the writer of Antagonist, how did you, well, yeah, like I said, you've been doing it from the very beginning, but how did you decide you wanted to kind of write and create games? What did that look like for you?
So I've been doing this forever, but the role-playing game I told you about wasn't the first game I created. The first game I created was back in second grade, where I decided to redesign Tag.
Right. Okay. What changes did you make, if you can remember?
My dad's a biochemist, so he would walk me to school every day and tell me about various things. And one of the things he told me about was how the human body works. So I made a version of Tag that emulated fighting off disease in the body.
Oh, amazing.
And I got a lot of positive feedback on that when I ran into some kids and I was trying to teach them to play the game, and they told me they already knew. They had played it at some kid's birthday party. I didn't even know this kid.
So you were already a famous game designer?
On the playground, yeah.
In certain middle school and junior circles, very famous. Okay, amazing. But sorry, I keep interrupting you. So you've always been playing games from Tag to role-playing games. Yeah. So when did you start in earnest? Yeah.
This Antagonist was the first game that I really designed from scratch with my own system. I did some experimentation with other games to see if my ideas that I was going to use for this one were going to work. And then I just started writing it, revising it, revising it. And this was the first one that I went all the way to the end with.
Is that in this? So I mean, we're pretty much there. We've segued very nicely into just talking about the game. So if people haven't heard of Antagonist, how do you introduce it to people? What's the elevator pitch for the game?
There's two I use.
Okay.
One is when I very first came up with the game, I wanted to design a game where the players would be allowed to lose without dying, without starting over new characters.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds
good. So for that, I needed a type of conflict that the game handles that doesn't end in death necessarily.
Okay.
So the game, so I moved the game more into kind of the political and economic area of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Where people, are playing characters that are courtiers or merchants trying to make it in a very hostile world.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then after I came up with that idea, I was like, well, what would be a fun way to do this? It's not fun to be the hero merchant doing all these underhanded economic maneuvers to like manage their shop or take out the competition. So it's like the players are going to be the antagonists. And that's where the idea for the game came.
And hence the title of the game as well, very fittingly. So, what sort of characters are we playing in this world? So, we're playing the bad guys? Is that right?
So originally, I was going to make the player characters bad guys, and then there were these other good guys, and they'd clash. I moved a little away from that. You can still play that sort of game, but I set the game in kind of a dystopian empire. The evil emperor has taken over most of the continent, and you operate as not one of his minions, but you're in his empire. You earn your bread by doing his will. So
you're just following orders. Is that sort of vibe?
Something like that.
Okay.
Except a lot more opportunistic, because it's not fun to follow orders. It's fun to look for holes in the system that you can take advantage of. So you're operating as these people in this evil empire. Everybody around you aren't nice people either, for the most part. And you're kind of all at each other's throats. But at the same time, there's also this other, and I made them kind of the good guys, the people that are being conquered. They're more morally upright, usually, at least how the game is initially written. And so you have to deal with the fact that everybody around you is trying to take your stuff, and you're trying to take theirs. But in addition, there's this external force that's threatening you to disrupt your way of life.
Oh, well, tell us a bit more about the world. So if people watching the video, they can see the map that we've got here, which is the world that the game is setting. So talk us through that a little bit.
Okay, so ancient history in the world, bunch of city-states, none of them could interact. Reason being, the Fae, who were kind of the big bads at the time, ran the wilderness. So you didn't go out into the wilderness unless you were very prepared, and the city-states could not establish trade routes. They couldn't talk to each other. They couldn't interact. So they were all isolated. At some point, an explorer who I based kind of on a mixture of Cortez and Ponce de Leon, the guy that was looking for the Fountain of Life, Fountain of Youth, proposed to his king. He was based in this little city-state kind of close to these mountains over here. And he said, I think I've found the ancient Fountain of Life in these ancient tombs. Fund an exploration for me to go look for it. And the king was getting on in these years, and he did. And the explorer went off to look for this fountain. Came back 20 years. So I said I based him a little bit on Cortez. He found kind of the equivalent to the Aztec civilization on the other side of the mountains. He found the Fountain of Youth as well. And he, instead of conquering the Aztecs, he cut a deal with them and took their armies back to conquer his own kingdom.
Okay, great. Okay. So a little twist on
that. And then from there, he's been expanding steadily over hundreds of years, because he's now immortal, his empire. And he's kind of pushed all of these city-states that couldn't interact. They couldn't build armies. They just were on their own. He's pushed them all kind of to the brink of extinction. So you operate in this empire that's kind of just on the verge of conquering the world. And that's when magical gunpowder gets invented by your enemies, the good guys.
Okay, so they've got gunpowder and weapons on their side, but we don't have that technology yet.
Correct. The empire does not.
Okay. So yeah, it sounds like a pretty dangerous world then. So, but these characters, if we talk a bit about kind of character creation, roles, and archetypes, just to understand, if we jump into this game, into this world, who the people we're going to be playing, who are they? So, what sort of different roles and archetypes do we have in the game?
Okay, so there aren't traditional classes, but there are backgrounds, and they kind of dictate how you progress a little bit. Not so much in what abilities you get, but how easy it is to gain new abilities. So anybody can learn any ability, but it's easier for certain backgrounds to learn certain abilities than others, or to get good at them at least. So you pick your backgrounds. You get kind of 3 points, and you can spend all 3 points on like a big background, like being a wizard, or you can spend 1 point at a time with little backgrounds. Like I was a peasant for 10 years, and then another point for I was a huntsman after that. And all of these have some effects on how you progress. As far as your roles go, as I said, anybody can do anything. Some people are better at certain things than others, but the roles are kind of split up into people that focus on the personal themselves, people that focus on resources, the economic, and people that focus on kind of the social and political aspects of the world. And a group of player characters will often have people that focus on one thing or the other, or they'll split their focus between two of them. You can't really be good at all three, though.
So you need to assemble almost a team of people, a party, if you will, to achieve everything you need to.
Yep.
Great. So what goes? So we pick our backgrounds for character creation, and that indicates different skills and things like that. You did mention the wizard, so I wanted to talk about the role of magic in this world. So what you've mentioned the Fae as well. So what does magic look like every day in the world? Is it like very present, or is it rare, or what style of magic there is in the world? That's what I'm trying to rambly ask you.
In the Empire, I based it a lot on medieval Europe, so Spain specifically, and the peasant folk, most of the world is very superstitious against magic. So if you are magically capable, you use your powers in public, you're gonna get some pushback. Because the empire is so big, it's actually split into regions, and in some regions it's illegal outright. In other regions, it's just frowned upon. Some regions they've kind of embraced it a little more. And powerful nobles employ wizards, but generally magic is rare and not accepted in the empire. And the reason for this is because the Fae are kind of the traditional enemies of the empire. Originally, all the city-states were separated because of the Fae. The empire needs to, talk to each other, so they needed to basically clear out the Fae, and so all of this magic was kind of, they were at war with it for a long time.
That makes sense why them being the wizard is like a big point by background, because it's like you probably had to invest a lot into having this ability, and it's a big part of who your character is then. So that makes sense.
One of the main special ability of the wizard is you are allowed to cast magic. You get that special ability regardless of the laws of the nation. You have special provisions that allow you to use your magic.
Well, that's good. So you're not having to run around and hide constantly. So that's good to know. So in terms of the game, if you were to give an overview of the system, so say somebody's like either new to role-playing games, or like they've just played like D&D 5e and they're coming to play this game, how do the rules mechanically work? What's kind of what are we actually doing when we're sat at the table?
Okay. So the dice mechanic is pretty simple. You play with 3d10. You never use more or less than that. Well, I should say you never use more than that. And everything you do, you're going to roll your 3d10, and you usually are going to add an attribute to each of your dice. Sometimes it's a different attribute. Sometimes it's the same attribute all across. Like if you're pushing a boulder, you might add your brawn to every single die. If you're arguing with someone, you might have a variety of attributes that are involved in how good your argument is.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll add different ones to each die.
Sure.
Each die you're going to have a target number, and each die will either hit that target number or not. So you
Sure.
basically have 4 options. You could fail completely, not hit your target number on any 3 of your 3 dice. You
Okay.
could get a partial success if you hit your target number once. A normal
Mm-hmm.
success is twice. And if you roll all 3, it's a critical success.
Perfect. We like those when they can happen. So what made you choose kind of D10s for it? Because there's a few systems that use kind of D10s, and like I think that's World of Darkness that comes to mind immediately. So what kind of effect does that have on the feel of the game using kind of your D10 as opposed to like a D20 or a different dice?
It was just a math reason. It's
Okay.
really easy to calculate probabilities on a D10.
That's true. Actually, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, that makes sense.
I have some alternate rules if you want to use other dice. Like if you're new to role playing and all you've got is your Monopoly dice, I've got ways to use D6s, and
Interesting.
you just lower the target number by 2, and you can
Okay.
use your D6s instead of your D10s. But D10s are nice and easy to calculate your probability. If you have a 3 in 10 chance of succeeding on each die, you've got a 30% chance.
Okay, amazing. So one of the things that we kind of talked about in the game that was really different, that stood out to me, was you mentioned like a political combat system, or like alternative resolutions to a situation opposed to combat and just fighting in that way. Could you talk a little bit about how that works?
Okay. So all the conflict kind of works similarly. It's just that there's 3 different types of hit points. There's your health, which if you run out, you're injured, not dead, injured. I originally had it where you die when you run out of health. Playtesting that tended to happen too suddenly, so I changed it.
I can imagine you get a few bad dice rolls and you're dead. But some systems that works. Like, depends on the story you're trying to tell. Some games you want it to be a few bad dice rolls, you're gone. But maybe not in this. This seems more like a campaign setting where you have weaving plot lines and stuff going on. So,
because players have very different strengths, they're necessarily going to need to be very weak in an area, and it's possible that somebody's going to come in and take away all of their relevant type of hit points in 1 or 2 rolls, and suddenly they're off the table. So instead of that, I made a wounded ruling, and then you don't die until you get negative whatever your hit points are. And then there's 3 types of hit points. You got your combat hit points, and you take damage normally. Then your reputation is your social hit points. And when you run out of that, you're socially wounded, which has different effects than being physically wounded. But
you're not going to get into the good places. Maybe your name's been taken off a few lists, and
you can even end up in jail if your reputation is damaged enough.
Oh, wow.
And then there's also your prosperity, which is your economic hit points. And when you run out of that, you're in a great deal of financial jeopardy. You might have to be making some cuts, firing all your minions, what have you. And there's a 4th type that doesn't come up very often. It's unit cohesion. It's for when you're running like big battles and you have armies fighting, but that's basically the same as health. It's just health for large groups of people.
Okay, sure. So if you're conducting operations and moving, like you say, minions about, it's the rules for how that works, I guess.
Right.
Fab. Okay, so great. So we have all these different type of hit points and things. So how does kind of political combat sort of work? So if you're used to just, having combat be I jump in with my dagger and stab it, like how do you role play and mechanically have a political kind of combat situation?
So combat turns in politics occur like once a week. So in normal combat it's like a few seconds for a sword swing or whatever. In political combat you get 3 action points to spend over the course of a week, and you might slander your opponent, going about telling everybody they've done this horrible thing, and you get bonuses if they've actually done the horrible thing, and you can prove it.
It's
but
true. Yeah,
they don't have to. You can lie.
So like real world politics then.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can undermine them where you secretly try and sabotage their reputation or what have you, and you make your roll. You spend some number of action points. It's usually 2 or 3 of your 3 per week, and you make your roll, and you see how much damage you've done to their reputation. And they might get some sort of protection roll to reduce the damage. Maybe they don't because they're not important enough. And eventually you reduce them down to 0. There's a little bit more in like how you engage people. Like if everybody is ganging up on the same person, it gets progressively harder because there's too much noise.
Right.
So it kind of, I didn't want the only good strategy to be dogpiling someone. So there's kind of an anti-dogpiling rule where people get bonuses to their defense. The more times they've been attacked in a given way over the course of a week.
Fair enough. Maybe they've learned how to combat that then.
Yep. And as far as when you say how do you role play it, there's a lot of kind of suggestions for how you might do one of these maneuvers, like a slander maneuver or an undermine maneuver. And there's kind of a list under the action description. You could do this, you could do this. But really what it is, and the way I've run it in the playtests, is I ask the players to describe to me what they're going to do. And then I look through the actions and say, well, yeah, that sounds like this action, so make that roll. So I let them role play first, and then I figure out what type of action it is afterwards.
That's pretty much how I role play any game, especially when I'm new and I don't know the rules. I just like whoever's running the game. I'm like, so I want to do this mechanically, how? And let them do that. Speaking of the role, kind of the game master. So you mentioned we have different types of players that have different strengths and weaknesses. And we had a really great question come in, which is how should a game master running this game keep players engaged when the players are focusing maybe on different, things? So there may be one person's very political and doing that sort of combat thing, but someone else is a bit more of like a soldier, physical, they're focused in different areas. How do you keep them all engaged, and maybe is there a way they can interact and assist each other?
Yeah, that's a really important question because this kind of game, you have people doing very different things. And the way I tried to address that is to make sure that no matter how bad someone was at something, they could still help out. And there's a system for helping somebody do something. And you basically roll against a much lower difficulty. It's much easier. So if your stats are bad in that area, you can still succeed. And you'll give them advantage. So you basically describe how you're helping them out. You spend action points and you take the same action they did, but at a lower difficulty because you're only helping them. You're not initiating anything. And you can kind of, no matter what your role is, you can still pitch in a different area. There's also a lot of interacting roles. Like for instance, say somebody's making a spy, and spies tend to be more personally focused. They tend to like invest in their personal attributes like strength and speed, particularly. And you've got your politician. Your politician needs your spy to uncover all of their opponent's secrets. So they're going to get the spy to go out and do something which will prepare them to do their political maneuver.
Okay. So it's a lot. It is still, even though they're doing very different things, different skills, it's very much trying to be kind of a collaboration. So that way. Awesome. I hope that fully answers the question. But yeah, so we're talking about political combat systems. What about like other types of combat systems? So what about actually if I do just want to go and stab someone at some point? How does that work again?
Well, all the combat actually works the same. So once you learn one combat system, you kind of learn all of them. So say you want to stab somebody, you roll your 3 dice. Your dagger will, require certain stats, probably finesse mostly, maybe a little bit of brawn to push it in a little deeper. And you'll get some number of successes. Your opponent will, how well they dodge is basically one of their defense types. and you'll roll against that defense type. Count up how many successes, and that's how much damage you do. And if your opponent's wearing armor, they can reduce that damage a little bit. It's a chance. It's not a flat reduction.
Okay, great. Well, that's good to know. So if you play different characters and play it again, you're not going to be totally lost because you're playing a different sort of background or a different sort of angle. So that's good to know. In terms of when we've been talking about the game, for me, this feels like something that would be like good for a campaign. Like you want to have stories that like had the seeds of it happen earlier on, and then later on it kind of comes back, kind of like an epic Game of Thrones type style thing. You know what I mean? It feels like a large scale kind of campaign game to me. And so that means characters over time will learn new skills and grow. So I wanted to talk to you about incentive structures because you mentioned to me before that you have 4 different incentive structures in the game.
Yeah, so that was kind of a late addition. I was creating the game. I was very near to, my layout artist had already basically finished 80% of the layout, and I was like, I really want to add this one thing. It'll be super simple. It's just a bunch of text. Because I had been watching a video from Matt Colville on incentive structures. He was describing basically you can control the theme of your game just by how you reward your players. And I thought that was the greatest idea ever. And I thought, well, how many themes do I want in this game? And I decided 4.
Talk us through them.
Okay. So basically the incentive structures are an inbuilt different ways to award experience, and there are different reasons to award experience. And the 4 I came up with, the first one is expansionistic. If the players and the GM want to play a game where the players are just building their empire or their little empire within the greater empire anyways. Sure. And it's all about how big you can build your resource space, how important you can make your characters, and you're given experience based on how much you can get, how much you can add to your empire. Then I have kind of the more standard role-playing game, story-driven, where you get experience where there's some set story that the GM came up with, and you get experience for kind of doing story objectives. That's pretty standard for role-playing games. Then there's character-driven, which is a little less standard, but you still see it sometimes. Players don't get experience for accomplishing some set goal out in the world. What they do is when they make their character, they come up with some sort of ideology for that character, some core belief that character has. And when that character advances that ideology, either in a small way or a large way, they get experience for that. They also get experience for playing out their flaws. And I specified this, you get experience for playing out your flaws in ways that hurt you. But if you play out your flaw and it only hurts other people, you don't get any experience for that.
That seems fair. That seems really interesting about the whole idea of the kind of the ideology or the core thing for the character. In playtesting, what sort of ideas have players come up with for their characters around that?
I haven't actually run with that sort of system. I usually use a story structure.
Okay.
There was a 4th one.
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry.
The Machiavellian, which is a lot like the expansionistic, where you're building your empire. But in that, you're probably deeper in the empire. And there's not places to expand your little resource base. So you've got to take things away from other people. And if they want to expand, they have to take things away from you. So it's a lot more diabolical. It forces the players to think more on the defense as well as the offense, as far as like building themselves. And you get a lot of experience for taking things away from people, and you lose it when people take things away from you. And now I forgot the question you asked me about the story-driven.
Yeah, I was just wondering what sort of examples of things people have used for their kind of character's ideology for, when they're coming up with a different core belief for the third method you're talking about. I was just wondering if you had any fun examples of what people have done in gameplay, or what you kind of have in mind for that.
Or I haven't played with that structure, so I haven't seen like I've seen some interesting characters. People have come up with interesting characters, but since they weren't getting rewarded for that, since we were playing with other systems, that wasn't what the game was focused on. So I didn't see them necessarily realized. I'd say the most interesting character I saw was somebody decided to play a a hag, like a witch.
Okay, yeah.
Baba Yaga, basically. A Baba Yaga knockoff.
Nice. Yeah.
And their character was very much into family and their grandchildren, and kind of they convinced all the other player characters to play relatives of themselves. And they were very into family, but in a very warped way.
Okay, sure. Okay, no, that sounds really cool. I love that. As the idea, the nice like family. I love a family dynamic in an RPG anyway. But the idea of this matriarch or hag type Baba Yaga character, that sounds very cool. I like that. So speaking back into going into the world, we had somebody kind of ask about how you keep players engaged when it's very different systems, but on a more broader term, if somebody wants to run this kind of game and they're going to be the game master running this running Antagonist for the first time, what advice or guidance would you give to them to approach running a campaign of this?
So actually, I assumed that might be the case. Somebody might be dropping into this and never having played a role-playing game. I created a very simplistic set of rules for just kind of pickup play.
Okay.
And I guess if you've never role-played, you can use those rules. They're very simple to learn. They're like 2 or 3 pages.
Okay.
And you can pick it up, invite some people to play with you. Just throw something together that you saw on TV that you kind of fits the theme of the game. Game of Thrones would be a good example. You saw a scenario, you want to play it out differently. You want to see what your players do in that scenario. Use the quick pickup rules and just see if they're into it. And if they are, then you can expand and start playing like the full game. Just, you finish the characters basically, since they're partially made already, and keep going.
Amazing. So you can have a little kind of taster session, like, so if you want to do a one shot using those simpler rules to see if it's your thing before committing to a campaign. That's really good to know. So in terms of the game, so you talked about getting it to layout, writing it. So is the game finished now? If people are interested, can they buy a copy now? Or
oh yeah, it's been out since August.
Amazing.
And so the link there is where you order it, and it's available on PDF, or you can get the book, which this is the book.
Oh, amazing! So you can get that on DriveThruRPG now. That's a very
cool book. And I wanted to show this off. You won't get to see this if you buy the RPG or the PDF, but
the full cover art.
Yeah, it's all one picture of
all
2
wraps
people
around
playing chess with a series of people on the chessboard.
Which is very much a lovely metaphor for the whole kind of game. Great. So that is on DriveThruRPG. So if that sounds at all interesting to anybody that's listened, you can check that out on DriveThruRPG. The links are in the show note of the podcast, or I've just popped them in the chat if you're watching live. So you can go take a look out there. If people miss the live stream or they're listening on the podcast and have a question they want to ask you, where's a good place for them to get in touch to learn more about the game?
The Facebook group is a good place. I check that pretty frequently.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that would be the place.
That would be the main place there. Excellent. And you have a really nice website as well, which is on antagonistrpg.com, which has links to kind of everything. So if you can't find something, if you go to antagonistrpg.com, that's got links to where you can buy it and to the group and everything like that. And it's nicely laid out there. Which is fantastic to see. Is there anything else you want to brag about or share about the game? Is there a question I've forgotten to ask you?
Well, let's see. Oh, so that was actually my Cinderella reference right there, Dark Cinderella. But as far as the game goes, the magic system, I know a lot of people are very concerned about the magic system. The magic system is a little bit more Grimm's fairy tales than it is D&D oriented. A lot of the spells do weird things that, you know, aren't directly contributing towards some quest objective. Like, for instance, this is a picture of an actual spell where you turn a pumpkin into a carriage, lifted that directly from a fairy tale. And a lot of those spells are lifted directly from fairy tales. Spells can backfire. And usually the backfire results are unique to every spell. So they're always interesting. And they also kind of create an in-world reason why people would be superstitious. Because if you have some novice sorcerer just learning how to do things, they're going to backfire. Their spells are going to backfire a lot, and weird things are going to happen.
Sounds great. It also seems very linked to those fey elements that are in the world and is grounded as well. So magic being of that sort of, superstitious, mythical kind of uncontrollable natural force, opposed to being I cast fireball. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all about Antagonist with us. I love the theme of the game. I love a good, political combat and maneuvering sort of situations. So definitely something I was very interested when you told me about the game. I do have, before you go, my final question to everybody is always, do you have any recommendations for role-playing games? And the rules are, it can't be Dungeons and Dragons, and it can't be a game that you've written.
Actually, yeah. There's a game called Earth Dawn. Maybe a lot of people have heard of it. It's actually really old. I picked it up, I think, in the 90s. It's still around. And I always loved that it was kind of there's two games set in the same world, and one's Earth Dawn and one's Shadowrun. One's an old fantasy game. The other's, a cyberpunk game. They're set in the same world. One's like thousands of years later. And you get to kind of see Earth Dawn is kind of the beginnings, and Shadowrun is kind of how this world ended up. So you get to kind of see both. And Earth Dawn's a great system. It's kind of a building dice structure where you start with a D4 if you're bad at something, and you get a D6 or D12 as you get better, and then you can go past that. But it's got an interesting world. It's very high magic. There's magic everywhere. There's airships. There's all the characters can use magic. There's every single player class has some sort of magical ability. It's very high fantasy and it just went hard into high fantasy. It was one of the first games that had done that. This is before what's that?
For Warhammer Fantasy.
Not Warhammer Fantasy. The World of Darkness kind of made a fantasy game. I can't remember what it was. They did the same thing, but this was years before that.
Someone's listening to the podcast screaming at us right now. But yeah.
You play literally gods in that one, but Earth Dawn is kind of felt like the predecessor to that, where you're playing these really high fantasy characters in this world that's just coming back from the brink of destruction.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for that recommendation. I'll have to check that out if you haven't already. But I think that brings us to the end of our time this week. So James, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your game with us. As I mentioned before, you can check out Antagonist on RPG or on the website there, because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their stuff. But that's all from us this week. So again, thank you, James, and thank you everybody that's watched and listened. That's all for this week. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much.